All right. Welcome back to the channel, everyone. We're going to do a little deep dive today into how we cure the SIC, right? And SIC being the software industrial complex. Software industrial complex, you might have heard this term a few times. When we think about all of the various SaaS products that are out there and the procurement of buying these things at some of the world's largest institutions, as Chamath pointed out, we are talking about things that are bigger than state budgets when it comes to these purchases, license fees, et cetera, that are collected. And what this has sort of evolved into over time is a massive bureaucracy that is more obsessed with managing risk than driving innovation. And one of the best ways they they manage risk and don't drive innovation is just to outsource the company's mission to all of the various companies you see here, right? So like rather than have technology that's built for the company, that is designed for the business, the sort of bureaucracy and central IT organizations go out and procure these various products, customize them to meet their needs, rather than having something that is bespoke and actually delivering value for the company. And a lot of that is due to like people who want to manage risk and who don't want to um, take on endeavors that might actually lead to a positive outcome for the business. And if we look at what that has sort of evolved into, so like Alex Carpet said something yesterday that I think a lot of you missed, or maybe some of you didn't miss it, but he basically pointed out that a lot of the challenges we face in making technology work for our largest institutions and companies is to a lot of the challenges are structural. They're not technical, meaning like you have these groups inside a company that have become risk management centers that turn innovation into a bureaucratic exercise rather than an actual mission driven outcome that needs to be enabled for the business, right? Well, what does that look like in practice? Well, I'm on boots on the ground at some of the world's largest institutions every day. And what it looks like a lot of the time, and I'm not saying this is every company, but a lot of the time it looks a lot like this, right? You've got the central IT and technology house, right? That essentially has a bunch of people under it, right? And very few of them actually do any work. Most of them sit around all day and figure out like, how do we procure these SaaS products? What is the right strategy to fucking, I don't know, build some stack that's going to, replace this ERP with this ERP over 10 fucking years or whatever it is they're trying to do. And really what you have is a very top heavy org that is adversarial with the business in a lot of cases. And there's reasons for this. We didn't get here by default. There's a whole litany of reasons that we got here. I think number one, when we switched to agile from waterfall, we empowered IT with a lot more power in the organization than it previously had in a quest to sort of use technology to move margins up, drive costs down, and be a partner in the business. Well, that didn't work out too well because guess what margins have done? They basically stayed flat. Like I haven't seen the evidence anywhere that technology is improving anything for a lot of these legacy companies, right? I see plenty of evidence that's working for Netflix and Apple and Google and Facebook or Meta, right? Plenty of evidence there. Zero evidence that our world's largest companies who make things and sell things and ship things to you on a daily basis that you are actually using technology in a way that's improving their margins. And it's largely due to this because what we wound up with was a bunch of people who don't fucking do anything, who outsource procurement and the company, or who engage in procurement to outsource the company's mission to a bunch of other companies, right? Like these fucking companies that don't actually move the needle in any way, shape, or form for the American consumer or the American economy, where we could be innovating, we could be doing things better, right? So you wind up with this whole top heavy thing. And then over here, you got your operations teams and you got your business teams, and they're all sitting here going, wait a minute, like we have to wait 3 more years for you to migrate to SAP for HANA before we actually start moving the needle on software that works. Like, what the fuck is that? 10 years and $100 million later, you're going to tell me that we haven't moved the baseline. All we've done is shift it to the cloud. That's literally what's going on inside most of these organizations today. And again, this is a structural problem. Why is it a structural problem? Because the business and the operations folks get together and they say, hey, look, we got some goals. We really want to bring our cost down on this product, or we need to respond better to disasters and emergencies. And then they come over fucking here to the IT side of the house and technology side of the house, and that's where all innovation ceases. it goes into an endless bureaucratic exercise that has to have steering committees and councils and freaking 20 commissars to get anything done, right? That is a broken system. And so we need to teach, and this is not how technology companies operate, right? You don't flick over in Netflix like you have a great idea for a product and like it's going to go through 80. I can't speak for Netflix, but for the companies that I've been at, no, you put a team together. If you have a good idea, you pitch your boss, you get a team together, you go out there and you're going to build this product from start to completion, and you're going to deliver it with like 5 people, right? And it's going to hit a market of 100 million users or 300 million users or a billion users. And it's a mission-driven team that's going to fail fast and then find the next thing if that doesn't work, right? But it's not a hierarchy of a 10-year plan. This is a small mission-driven unit, like think special forces here, that's going to go out and attack the market with what they think is a great solution. They're going to manage it from start to completion, and they're going to get shit done, right? That's how you use technology effectively. So what we got to do is move from this crap over to something that looks a lot more like this, right? So something that is a business-led, tech-enabled endeavor where technology is an enabler. It's not the thing, right? Like there should be no world in which technology is a fucking roadmap, a plan. No. You're in the business of making widgets. You are going to make widgets, right? You're going to find ways to make widgets better and faster and like all that great stuff. We're not in the business of migrating to SAP for HANA. We're not in the business of figuring out a fucking AI strategy or anything else, right? We are in the business of making widgets. Technology needs to be brought to heel, and we need to make sure that when we leverage technology, it's done in a way that the business is leading it, right? Like the person who works the freaking problem needs to build the solution, right? So like what we have to do is sort of break up that central org and let's create mission-driven teams, right? Mission-driven teams with people who actually do shit, right? Who actually get things done. We're talking people who both are subject matter experts in how the business operates and subject matter experts in technology. Let's pair them together to solve a problem that they're capable of solving together, and for a limited scope and time frame to see if we can actually create an outcome that this person up here is interested in, or this person over here is interested in it, or this person over here is interested in, right? And this is how we're going to do it, right? And I think that what's interesting about Palantir is that this is essentially the FDE model, right? Like not for Palantir, it's the FDE model of how the FDE goes and embeds in an organization. It tends to look more like this, right? It tends to look like these small mission-driven teams who are trying to enable an outcome, usually for someone over here, but not always, sometimes someone over here or someone over here. And what is neat about that is you get this team of like qualified experts in the business that actually unpack the toughest problems that the business is facing and figure out a strategic and tactical way they're going to apply technology in a limited scope to move the needle of generating some sort of business value. And this is the key part of this. By destroying this bureaucracy over here, you're going to reframe problem statements not in terms of like, oh, we've got this beautiful technical architecture we're going to go implement on it. We got to check the boxes on this amazing technical architecture. Fuck your technical architecture. What you're going to move the needle on is some sort of business outcome that we care about, right? X metric is going to improve by X%, and we're going to be able to attribute the value to what you actually did, right? That is how CEOs and COOs need to start framing the freaking mission for these people over here. Stop with this BS. Technology gets to define the roadmap. No, they don't. They work for you. You don't work for them. And so what we're going to do is blow this apart. And by restructuring the org with a mindset of like enabling business outcomes, move fast, small teams, the people that work the problem, build the solution, you start to narrow down your scope, like your universe of available technologies pretty freaking quickly. And I'll tell you one thing, you aren't going to be able to do that with these companies, right? These are very siloed, very fragmented ecosystems that are optimized for their growth, not your mission. Okay. So you ain't getting there with the usual suspects of, SaaS 1.0 bullshit. Okay. It ain't going to happen. So like in order to enable this sort of mission driven org that is optimized for business outcomes, you need to start looking at platforms that abstract away the hyperscaler. Why do you need to do that? Hyperscalers are complicated, dude, like super, super complicated. You're going to quickly devolve back into this model where you need like a team of a bunch of people who think they know how to build these things and then tell like a few people down here what to do, and then they fuck it all up because this is actually complicated stuff. We need a platform that like abstracts all that away so we can just focus on missions and not fucking platforms, right? Building a platform is a whole bunch of undifferentiated heavy lifting. It takes years. I used to do it for a living, right? Like I ran the teams that built the infrastructure on AWS so product teams could deliver product. It's a massive undertaking. So the first thing is we need a sky compute layer, the layer above the cloud that makes the heavy, that takes all that undifferentiated heavy lifting that you would normally do, abstract it all away, and give you a starting block that is more like a sandbox to play in than, you know, all the grains of sand in the world, and you figure out how to stack them and arrange them, right? And that's exactly what Foundry is, right? Foundry is that sort of abstracted layer above the hyperscalers that has an opinionated way in which these teams should operate to deliver on the mission of the people up here, right? That is what Foundry essentially is. And again, this is a structural problem. Like, you could have the best technology in the world. If you don't figure out you need to do this, you're going to be stuck spinning your wheels forever. Because what the business will come over here and acquire Foundry because this fucking group over here, they haven't done shit to deliver on shit for fucking 10 years. And so the business comes over here and they're like, all right, well, I kind of like what Alex Karp is saying. I kind of like what I'm seeing in these demos. Let's go acquire Foundry and replace some of these spreadsheets that are running our business because technology hasn't delivered anything of value for 10 years. And then what ends up happening is this side of the house gets upset, right? Like, all these bureaucrats and commissars start noticing that like their tech, this is some shadow IT shit that's going on over here. Who told the business they're allowed to go out and procure something that's not on our roadmap for the next fucking 10 years? And they get upset, and there's a bunch of infighting, and like, you know, roadblocks are put up. And, you know, hey, you know, whatever you think about Donald Trump and his new administration, one thing that Trump realized early on was that like you need to remove detractors or you're never going to get anything done. And in my opinion, if you're acquiring Foundry and you're still dealing with this problem of like now your shadow IT and your central, you know, communist, you know, central IT org is upset at you, you remember that you're the CEO or you're the person that runs the business. I'm going to break apart that whole thing and I'm going to do this, right? And that's the ultimate answer here. Because Foundry works, the business sees that Foundry works. It was built to deliver the value. And so the way we're going to cure the SIC, it isn't just about providing a better technical product. It's about providing a better operating model for the business so they can get unstuck, man. And it's actually going to work out better for everyone, in my opinion. I think that managing building a bureaucracy and managing risk, there is a role for that. I'm not saying there's no role for IT. I think IT has to manage laptops, they have to manage devices, networks, and network security and protocols. There is a role for that. It's just a much smaller role. And what we need to do is disaggregate the function of managing the risk profile and the sort of day-to-day functions of a healthy IT team from technology, right? Like, IT and technology are not the same thing, but they're often lumped together into this same sort of bureaucratic, you know, monolith. And they need to be disaggregated from each other so that technology becomes something that is an enabler for the business. And then that managing of the risk profile, the security, the compliance, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, that can still remain with IT, but it's done in such a way that it empowers these teams, right? It's not a roadblock to innovation, and it doesn't include how we actually, the software we actually use to achieve outcomes, right? It's about the software we use to achieve outcomes being compliant and meeting the company's risk profile, which is a much, much different thing than what we have today. So again, not saying that there isn't a role for the CTO or isn't a role for, you know, a CIO. It's that those roles need to shift a little bit, and the CTO needs to be focused more on doing this, right? How do we put these mission, you know, business-led, tech-enabled teams together for specific outcomes that we're going to achieve in a specific period of time? So that's the first thing here. When we talk about curing the SIC, we need to cure these broken structures and put in place new ones that actually move the needle and use technology effectively. And I think that's what Alex was talking about yesterday on the CNBC interview. It's certainly my mission. It's what I'm preaching every day. Like, look, you know, we can sit here all day and talk about, you know, what piece of tech is better than another piece or the outcome you want to enable. But unless you find a way to get out of the business of shadow IT being the only fucking IT that works, you're going to have to break this up. Okay. So that's mission number one. The next thing I want to talk about is something that I'm working on, and I've had some revelations in like how we're going to build software in the future. So we have the software industrial complex. We've talked a little bit about the structural problems that are enabling are sort of standing in the way of innovation and our economy functioning properly. Next thing I want to talk about is how we're going to rebuild software on these new platforms in a way that is just fundamentally different than how all this shit works today. All of these things you see here were built pre-AI, and we'll get into AI in a minute, what I mean by that. But they were built pre-AI, and at their core, they weren't designed for an AI world in which we use neural nets inside of software. Okay, they're just not. These are systems that were built to be very rigid, very much on an if then else basis. You have to program the paths ahead of time. You have to manage state, all the time. And what that leads to is really complicated systems that are very rigid and fall down when the second you introduce some variant, some minor deviation in their purpose, right? So that's why there's so many of them too, by the way. Like the fact that there are all of these companies that deal with one small part of the things you need to do in a software system is evidence of the fact that the way we used to build software was very much a rigid, siloed, we can deal with one path and one domain in this system, and we deal with another one over here. And the reason we can't have one system that does it all is because how complexity evolves in software systems. And it's like, we do a lot of hard work as engineers to manage complexity and complexity growth in a complex application. Trying to do all domains in one is just never something we could have envisioned in a way. And so what I want to talk about, I'm gonna share just a brief overview of something I'm working on called CommsForge, right? You saw a little teaser of it the other day. And what do we do in CommsForge? Well, I have this crazy idea that, like, rather than spending my time running between Outlook and Teams chats and freaking meetings and phone calls every day, what if I could just have all that shit centralized, right, into an ontology? I got my comms ontology over here that aggregates all that information together, presents to me the specific things that I need to do to follow up on for me automatically as the messages are coming in. And how can I use natural language then to follow up on those things? And why do we want to use natural language to follow up on those things? Well, I have this other crazy idea that, like, we spend a huge amount of valuable, precious compute time, like the high compute, the valuable compute that humans aren't very good at. If you haven't read Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, I highly recommend this book. You should read it. But human beings aren't really meant to be spending all of their time on high compute tasks. We're much better at pattern matching and sort of this sort of, I think it's system one that Kahneman explains. It's not like the critical thinking tasks and doing math. You're just moving about your day, responding to fight or flight mechanisms and sort of intuitive thought, that you reach the answer before you knew why you reached the answer. That's what we're really cut out for. And a huge amount of stress and cognitive load every day is just spent on remembering how to use these shitty fucking software systems, ones that were built by the organization's centralized freaking T function, right? And it doesn't work properly, and it's got riddled with bugs, and it's super slow, and you got to remember how to use 10 of those things to do one freaking task. And then you got to jump between Microsoft's awesome software, which I'm sorry, fuck you. You got to jump between Microsoft's awesome software that just like adds this other layer of cognitive load, and then there's this other layer of cognitive load with like some other piece of shit software you have to use, and like a huge amount of our mental energy now is going in to remember where's that setting, how do I do X, blah blah and blah. I want to take that load and just remove it from everything. And what LLMs are enabling is natural language being the interface into these systems, right? That's point number one. We can get rid of the UI. We don't need to use an interface. We don't have to remember how to use an interface. I can speak the thing, and the LLM can figure out how to pull the parameters out of the message, infer what I mean, then go out and invoke a function that does a thing. Now, I'm going to show you something here, and this is just like an example, right? It's a notional example. Don't get all freaked out. You're going to look at some code. It's good for you. Trust me. This is a write email function. It's part of our CommsForge platform. And in CommsForge, you can just speak natural language, like send an email to so-and-so asking for X, right? I don't have to go over to Outlook. I don't have to like type in the email address and any of that shit. If I want attachments done, I can add attachments in my message. But the point being is like this idea that you don't have to have structured inputs. What we send to an input in this function is the literal task that you define, right? Send an email to Bob asking for so and so. right? And what we do in here is we have an LLM extract and format that into some structured outputs that we can then use downstream to actually interact with the G Suite APIs, right? And so, and this is a fun fact. All this is going to be open source. We're going to give this away to the community, including the integration. We built a compute module to interact with G Suite APIs. Why do we use compute modules? Well, Functions doesn't have a node runtime that supports the Google APIs currently. So we built a compute module that runs all this integration for you, and you're going to be able to use these functions directly. But the point is by using LLMs to use unstructured inputs, we take the load just immensely down. Like, you don't have to go to this box to type this email address before you send this freaking email, or go to the attachments thing. What the LLM is doing is, and it will interact with you if it needs additional information. What the LLM is doing is figuring that stuff out on your behalf. And in a very neat way, we scale that using knowledge graphs, which I'll explain later in a future video. But this is point number one. Remember now, all of these companies that I showed you before, all of them were built in an era where their software needed structured inputs from the user. You need a UI to add a specific field, a specific thing. None of them were designed from the ground up to do what I'm talking about, which is like build the structured inputs from language, right? That's a fundamental paradigm shift in how we build software. And I'm thoroughly convinced that adding Clippy to any of these things ain't going to get you there. It ain't going to do the thing that I'm talking about doing. That's just not the way these things were designed. Now, maybe they're going to try and do a few things, but they've got several decades of tech debt in some cases that they're going to have to punch through to make that vision happen. Oftentimes it's easier to start over with this as a first principle. Now, the second principle I want to talk about briefly, and I'll go back over to our lineage diagram, is like, what about control flow? So I'm gonna hit you with some technical stuff, and software engineers in the audience, you're gonna like this. But like, I was talking earlier about complexity growth in software systems, and a huge portion of the complexity growth is due to state management and logic and control flows. And what is state management? It's like, in a software system, we keep track of things that happen, right? Like all these things that happen in a system. And based on that, in really bad software, you do stuff, right? So like, think of like, you got this state store and it's got all these bits of information. And then some asshole somewhere wrote a bunch of if then else conditions to figure out if this bit is true, if this bit's flipped this way and this one's flipped this way, I'm going to show this screen or do this thing. Insane amount of complexity that's built into this. And because developers often don't realize they need state machines to manage these things, you get a massive growth in complexity as the number of parameters in that state store grows and the number of sort of paths you need to support grow. And the second thing that fucks this whole thing up is that the developer is then sitting there writing insane amounts of control flow. Like, if this happens, do this. If this happens, do this. Every case has to be handled. There's no world in which you could just kind of describe generally what you want to have happen, and then it would just do it, right? Like, you have to actually code out all these paths. And that takes place in distributed teams that work in a single code base. So you got like 50 people doing this. The complexity needle just goes exponential, right? And this is a big problem because the more complicated your software system becomes, the harder it is to change it and add new features and add new things. And so what we did when I was meeting with my crazy heretic cohorts or heretic friends, when we were thinking about how's CodeStrap going to build open source software for the Palantir community, we said, you know what, we're going to build state machines we were going to take state machines as a first principle, right? And I created this framework called XReason. It's an open source framework. Let me pull it up for you, and bear with me. The open source variant hasn't been updated with all the latest and greatest stuff. Let me share this tab here with you guys. But this is built for React. It's a TypeScript library. It's built on XState, which is a state machine language that is created by Stately.ai. Go check them out. They've got amazing technology. But what XReason does fundamentally, I don't know if I have let me see if I have a graph I can show you guys to kind of give you an idea of what like XReason's all about. I believe I do have a graph somewhere if I can find it. Yeah, I have it here. Let's go ahead and take a look at XReason. So like what XReason's all about is how do I have the special neural net called the solver? And these solvers are very domain specific, right? By domain specific, they know how to solve tasks for a particular job function, for example. Like in the case of CommsForge, I created this AI called Vicky, and Vicky, the solver, knows how to send emails. She knows how to send Slack messages, get project reports together, create task assignments for you, all kinds of stuff, right? But it's a very domain-specific solver. And we make lots of these solvers to handle specific job functions, but it's an SME in that area. And what it can do is output a task list with all the required parameters that you don't have to remember to input anymore. So if I want Vicky to send an email, Vicky will figure out who I want to send that email to, what the subject of the email should be, a better explained body with the softened tone, because I'm kind of a jerk. And so she does all this stuff on your behalf. And that's what a solver model does. And the outputs an order task list in a structured form in Markdown. Markdown is just like a rich text editor. And that's it. That's what the solver does. And then what the programmer does, it comes in there and turns that task list into a state machine that is an X state machine, using a special domain-specific programming language that I created as sort of an intermediary between the LLM and this X state program that needs to be built. What does that all mean? Well, you're all going to see it, I hope, very soon, Q2 2025. But we built this sort of whole thing end to end. We have this, like, this is the programmer. The programmer explodes the generated state machine from the LLM into an X state machine. And we built this interpreter for Foundry. What this interpreter does is it lets you navigate through the state machine, go forward and back through states in the state machine. And what does that look like in practice? Well, I'm just going to show you a quick preview. Let's create a task here, and we're just going to say something like, create a task for Dorian to talk to the community about the launch of X reason in what we call it, let's call it CommsForge. Launch of CommsForge in Q2 2025. We're going to go ahead and submit that. And what's going to end up happening is our solver is now going to come in and figure out, okay, what do I actually need to do? And you can see our solver, Vicky, has said, all right, I need to create a task for me with my email address about this thing. Because in order to assign a task, you need to know who to assign it to. That's a parameter, though. That is an email address in most systems. And let me show you how we manage our tasks real quick. So here's our Kanban board. Thank you, Logan, at Palantir, for building this. I took it and decided to make a much more robust version of it. We're keep adding to it every day. But this is how we manage our tasks in Foundry. By the way, everything we do is in Foundry. Like when I was talking to my crazy heretic friends about how we would support the open source community, the first thing was we will have no other product than Foundry. So everything's done in Foundry as a first principle. Whole thing, everything end to end. So anyway, let's come back to my task list that was generated. Okay. One, this is pretty incredible in the sense that, like, I didn't have to like go into an input field to figure out Dorian is this person right here identified by this email. I also didn't have to go to the create task screen of some shitty piece of software that I don't want to use. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to accept this task because okay, this task was pretty good. Now what we're going to do is execute it, right? Let's execute that task. What's happening in the background is we're turning this into a dynamically generated state machine that will run inside of Foundry and will actually create this ticket for us. Okay, you can see the ticket has been created. Let's go ahead and jump into the Kanban board. What I'm going to do is look for, here it is, comms engagement for CommsForge launch, right? And here we got the task description and it was created for us. But look, notice I didn't have to go in here and interact with the system to do that, right? I used natural, oh, sorry, I realized I wasn't sharing this tab. Here's my task that Vicky just created. It's got our description in it. And what I didn't have to do was interact with this system or know how to interact with this system. It's just created automatically. And what's backing this is an ontology object, right? We have a task ontology object. The UI here isn't super important. It's what's in the ontology that's super important and how we use that later to remind me I need to do this and to mark it as done. But all of that is going to be done through natural language. Yes, there's a UI. You can jump into the UI if you need it. But the point being is I shouldn't need it. I should be able to interact with everything in the ontology, aka every other piece of software. Because remember, the ontology can orchestrate every single one of the applications we saw earlier in that SIC diagram. The ontology can orchestrate all of them, right? So like, there's no reason that I should have to jump into 15 different apps, including Salesforce, if the ontology is all I need, and the ontology is all you need, right? So like, the fact that I can train this system to perform these discrete actions and dynamically compose them together into a control flow that is managed by an LLM as opposed to a software engineer. And it's built on a state machine library. Remember earlier I was talking about how state management is a huge growth in complexity. What I've done is I've driven out two fundamental drivers in complexity in my software applications. One is the state store management that is delegated to X state and state machines. And two is this thing that I'm talking about with control flow. We didn't program the paths for Vicky here hard coded. Vicky figured out how to combine these atomic functions, right? These ones here. This is the list of everything that Vicky knows how to do. All these functions here. She figures out how to combine those with the logic and like the if then else stuff that needs to be there in order to achieve an outcome. What does that mean? That means my software graph of complexity isn't exponential anymore. It's not even linear. The growth and complexity in my software system is logarithmic. It's going to flatten out, right? And whenever I add a new task that Vicky can do, I just add a function here and that's it. And a description and a catalog, right? Now Vicky can do this thing in response to natural language, right? Come in here and now that the new function's added, she can do that thing and I can ask her to do that thing, right? So like, this is just a fundamentally different way from building software. And it's going to take a freaking sledgehammer to SIC, right? It's going, these companies, dude, I'm telling you, your days are numbered if you can't evolve quickly, because the companies are coming out now and rethinking how software should work the way I'm describing it. It's just fundamentally different. Now, I'm not saying every company is going to fall to this. I think the most vulnerable are the ones that heavily rely on workflow management. And the thing with workflow management is that today it's a very siloed thing. It takes place in this app, you do this part of the workflow, this app, you do this part of the workflow. Now imagine like what I'm showing you with Vicky, where all of my communications are brought in as a first, like we generate all of the tasks to perform from the systems of record, which are the emails, the meeting transcripts, the Slack messages, and we can actually orchestrate workflow across all systems through the ontology, right? It's not just your, ERP, not just your CRM, not just your HR system or your, whatever your integration layers. We can go across all of those from the ontology, and we can dynamically put it together in response to the actual data that runs your org, which is the human beings out there talking every day, right? And not only that, you can interact with this new technology and you can interact with the ontology, not through a UI, but through natural language. All that cognitive load we talked about earlier that's placed upon you by these companies to have to learn how to use their freaking software is gone, right? We can get back to as humans using language to describe what we want to do. And we can use that mental energy that we save by not having to remember how to do all these things in these systems and put that into things like improving emotional intelligence or improving relationships or, figuring out how strategically we're going to achieve a goal. We can put that mental energy back into things that matter, maybe your families, maybe whatever. You bring that stress level down, you bring that cognitive load down, and the whole world gets better, right? And it actually translates into improved GDP. Like if we can really pull this off at scale that I'm talking about doing, American industry is not only going to be reborn, it's going to kick serious fucking ass. And so like the mission is to achieve this, right? We need to destroy this crap. All this mental energy spent on remembering how to use these shitty products and this UI, it's gone, right? We're going to replace it with actually getting things done and moving the needle. And again, this is a structural problem. It's not just a technical problem. Right? We're going to use mission-driven teams that are driven by the business, right? Not a roadmap, not an architecture, not any of this BS that we're doing now. We're going to create mission-driven teams that use technology in the way I'm describing to move the needle on the entire economy. That's the goal, right? That's the freaking goal. It's not a digital transformation. It's not these other things. It's about how do we restructure industry so it works again, right? So that's the mission. I hope you all enjoy this episode. I hope you're fired the fuck up. You rewatch that Alex Karp episode or that interview he did on CNBC with all of the context here I just gave you, right? Rewatch that interview and get pumped. Get ready to get to work. Go into your orgs and create change. Reach out if you want help. I think everyone at Palantir, everyone I know will immediately try and help you if you're trying to move the needle on this mission. So let's get to work. Let's do this.